Nothing feels better than going viral. When you write something or blog something or podcast something and it goes around the internet and you're getting high fives all over the place, you feel really good. And yet, nothing feels worse than the opposite. When you put something out there and instead of getting congratulations, you get disagreement and sometimes anger. And it feels like everyone is against what you just said. And you might have even had good intentions, but it happens anyway. Well, that happened to me a few months ago. This is the Earn and Invest podcast, but when it was called What's Up Next, I booked a guest and recorded what I thought was an excellent episode. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but between the months that I had recorded the episode and when it went live, that community member had said and done some things that everyone else was not in agreement with. So there was a lot of anger towards this figure, and I always release a few days before a teaser for my episodes. And when I released this teaser, I put it on my Facebook group page. All I got were comments, and they were full of anger. How could you give this person a voice? How could you be a platform for the things that have been done? And usually I'll get 10 or 20 comments on these type of posts. A few hundred comments in, I was a little bit lost because I didn't know exactly what to do. The one side of me said, I truly believe in free speech and I don't like censorship. And I know that what's in this episode is great. On the other hand, I also know that what this person happened to do hurt a lot of community members. And I don't want to give a platform to people who do destructive things. Eventually, I decided not to air the episode. And my reasoning was this. I had built this podcast around the community that I wanted to reach. I wanted to build this community. And if my community was coming back to me in force and telling me that this guest was not fitting the community we had built, then it behooved me to listen. So I did. But months and months later, I still have trouble with this concept. When someone you believe in and trust, maybe when they talk about personal finance, says something that you don't agree with, or even that you find egregious, what do you do? Do you stop following them? Do you untweet them? Do you cancel them? But if you do that, isn't that censorship? What happens then to freedom of speech? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Pete Adeney is the renowned blogger behind Mr. Money Mustache. He is a writer of iconic posts such as the shockingly simple math behind early retirement, a man who I had only heard uniform praise for until a few days ago in response to a single tweet. First of all, Pete, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you in video form for the first time, even though we've met in real life in the past. I just wanted to comment. It's kind of funny because I haven't been very universally praised. I've had like the most crazy stuff thrown at me since the beginning in 2011, just because I always write stuff that is not the common, it's like not very mainstream. It's not mainstream to say that you're allowed to spend not all your money in the United States. Like that alone is controversial. So people are mad at me all the time.
So let's talk a little bit about this tweet that caught me a few days ago and people's response to it, especially our community's response. What was the tweet about and what did people respond to it?
Well, this tweet, and I've kind of been doing this a little bit since the beginning of the COVID times, is I've just been trying to encourage people to focus on things that they can control, as I always do in finance. And I am also like kind of a health blogger too. So I've been frustrated that the stories, especially in like New York Times and MSN stuff, has always been focusing on how scary COVID is and how helpless we are. We should all stay home. And these people are bad because they're not wearing masks. Look at this picture of these people at a pool. They're focusing all this stuff that's anger and divisive and not really helping anybody, right? And then I've noticed like the shame culture comes out every time I say I'm doing something with my friends. People are like, online. They're like, where's your social distancing? You shouldn't be seeing your friends. I think this is a really counterproductive response. So I started responding by putting in things that make a bigger difference in public health than getting or not getting COVID, which is not to diminish the importance of that, but it's just bigger numbers. And so I've been telling people they should be getting more exercise, they should be eating better, should be riding your bike. It saves, like, if everybody did this more, we'd save a lot of lives. And even just on a personal level, if you start to improve your personal health and then later you catch the virus or any virus, you're going to have a lot better outcome, So I just focus on that stuff. And then, in my comment, I said, here's the things you should be doing: bikes, barbells, and salads, which is like one of my slogans. And then I said, so why are we arguing about who's wearing and not wearing masks? Because I don't think that's what should be the dominating news force. Like, we can make a bigger difference if we focus on other stuff. So I thought that was the end of it. I thought people were like, oh, there goes Pete. He's just always talking about barbells, bikes, and salads next. But instead, people got really mad at me, and they interpreted that as an anti-mask stance. And that's unfortunately become a really dumb political I can't believe what the people fight about in this country. But, at this current time, the liberals versus conservatives have decided to fight about, like, are masks a good idea or not? So if you say anything that's not like, wear a mask, then you're suddenly a conservative. So that means you're an enemy of every liberal. And to be honest, it's just such a waste of time, which it was kind of just reinforcing what I was trying to speak out against. But I definitely see, I ruffled some feathers, and I am sorry about it. I did not want to be an anti-mask person and, to get into the politics of it. But I saw from the Twitter responses that that's how it went. So I made some responses to some of those people, like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. But you can't be too picky on Twitter. Like, you try your best, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And as you were saying, Jordan, it hurts you when, as a blogger or whatever, producer of content, the people that you're trying to help, that you think of as your people, if they don't understand it and they get angry with you, it can hurt your feelings. But at the same time, all you can do is try your best and not really let the criticism get to you too much. You use it as a question to your heart. But you can't just say, like, I'm going to quit now because some people are mad at me, because otherwise nobody would ever speak up for what they actually care about.
There's a lot to dive in your response, but let's start with the easiest and simplest. Just to clear things up, you are not anti-mask. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think, so I became a data nerd. Like, that's how I respond to stuff. And I didn't know a lot about viruses. So I've been reading, like, all the detailed stuff. So I look at charts and numbers and scientific stuff. And I definitely believe that masks are a quick and easy way to reduce virus transmission, definitely of COVID, but lots of other airborne viruses. And that was cool. That's stuff I didn't know. I learned that back in March when it was first becoming well known.
I want to talk a little bit more in a moment about some of the criticisms that came in the response to that tweet. But before I do, did this response surprise you? Did it seem a little bit more aggressive or different than the responses you've got in the past?
It surprised me a little bit, because I've made some missteps in these Corona times before, which were misinterpreted as being, like, conservative virus denier kind of stuff. So I try to make stuff more universally well understood and try to be clear about stuff. So a little bit of a surprise, but at the same time, like, it's pretty much 100% of anything I write is going to get criticism. And so I see angry people all the time: Facebook, Twitter, no matter what you do, you're going to get criticized. So I try to learn to not take it personally, and I read things, and then I think, I just look if the criticism, if I can learn something from it. Like, if it's somebody that I respect and who is doing it peacefully and honestly, like, hey, Pete, just so you know, this could be misinterpreted in this way. Or if somebody that, like, if Bill Gates is like, I mean, not like this would happen, but just as I use this as a funny example, like, Pete, I've been reading Mr. Money Mustache, and you're really doing the opposite of what you think. Like, you're trying to reduce material, natural resource consumption in the rich world, but here's some data that makes me think you're doing the opposite. I'd be like, shit, because that's somebody who really thinks about his actions, and he understands a lot of, big factors in the world. And if I'm counterproductive in Bill Gates' opinion, I would be really taking it seriously, and I would I'd be willing to change my approach or shut the whole blog down if I believed what he was saying. But if someone's just saying like, you're an asshole, like that's not a very good argument. So it's not very convincing.
Did you find that the criticism came from a different group of people this time around? It seemed like there were a lot of general personal finance community supporters who were lending voice to some of the criticisms. Did this feel different from that standpoint, that was criticism coming from different people, or not really?
I might not have read all of the stuff recently. I looked at Twitter for a while that day, and then I only log in about once a week. So there might be some surprises waiting for me when I get back. But there was one guy, like I think his account name is Freedom33, and he was really nice about it. He was like, I've been following you for a while, and I must say you're disappointing me with your stance here. So that was really good criticism. Like that's the kind that makes me really think. So we wrote back and forth a few times, and then it seemed like he understood my point later, but that's still a really good, that's not how Twitter should work. Like you're trying to make something that people understand the first time. If they have to dig into the comments to understand what the writer meant in the first place, that means I've made a mistake, which means I'm not using Twitter very well, because the only reason I use Twitter, it's not to like entertain myself or get prestige or anything. It's to try to get certain messages across to people in an easy to digest way. So if I put out some message that doesn't do what I hoped it would do, then to me that's a failure, because I'm not helping anybody.
Let's talk about some of those specific criticisms. You brought up the fact that you've been getting into data lately. One of the common criticisms I saw was people saying, you know what, Pete, you're getting out of your lane, right? You're in personal finance. Why are you commenting about health? What do you say to something like that?
I would disagree with that. So my lane is complex systems and numbers, and it always has been since I was a little kid. Like finance is just like the smallest thing that I'm interested in. I just happen to write a blog about it, but I'm just a normal, curious engineer person. So like I build houses and I design structures, and I am interested in music and other subjects. So I really happen to be interested in statistics, right? Statistics are really my jam since I was a little kid. And to me, COVID is really a pure statistics problem. Like it's all about multiplying factors and then how dangerous is the disease compared to other known risks. And I've been kind of fascinated by actuarial science, like lifespans of people and what are the different risk factors. And I've written other articles about that. Like one of them is called Safety is an Expensive Illusion. And I was trying to convince people that we are worrying about the wrong things. So as COVID has come out, and then I read about things like infection fatality rate and the different levels of cases versus fatalities in different countries, and then comparing this to the background death rate, that really is the stuff that I am most passionate about. And I use that to make my financial decisions. And I use that when I'm writing these blog articles about money. At an underlying level, they're based on statistics. And I just saw as the world's response happened, and then especially American media response to COVID, I saw something very much lacking. Like, for example, New York Times is really fond of saying like, an unimaginable toll, COVID deaths reach 135,000. Like that's more than 60 9/11s and stuff. Like they're comparing it to the wrong thing. And I think that's irresponsible, or at least negligent, like, ignorant reporting if they don't know. Like, okay, so if you're talking about public health, you have to talk about the context, like look it up. Like every year there are 2.8 million deaths in the US, which is 8,000 per day roughly. So anytime you talk about the deaths of anything, not just COVID, but whether it's nuclear power plants or smoking or car crashes, you have to always say as a percentage of normal deaths, because otherwise your readers, who are probably not scientists themselves, they're just going to see that number and like, yeah, 130,000 people sounds like a big number. But in the time since COVID started killing people in the United States, 1 million people have died from natural causes, right? So it's definitely a big deal, but you need to dig into the details to know how big a deal it is and who are the people that are dying. And those are all the things that I think we should just be reporting otherwise you're just scaring people, and people can't make good decisions when they're scared. So that's why I've been frustrated with with New York Times type COVID coverage. And I think I see that creeping into the way that the people on Twitter, you know, like if anyone's not into actuarial science and they just read the New York Times, then they're doing their part to be a good citizen. But what they're doing is like, let's be as vigilant as possible about like staying home and not seeing our friends and wearing masks. And they're doing that because it's their heart is pure and good, right? But they're doing it without even understanding what, you know, they're not getting the actual information. So then they're not making good decisions and not sharing good decisions. So it just frustrates me because I'm a numbers guy and I think everything should be explained with some numbers.
It's interesting that you say that, and I can almost see why that could be off-putting, because statistics are one side of the story, and a lot of people come at this problem much more from a behavioral, even somewhat emotional side. So they may say, for instance, yes, statistically, heart disease is something that causes more deaths, but there are billions of dollars spent on heart disease and meds, and heart diseases are things that happen that you can't control if heart disease happens in someone else. On the other hand, COVID is an infectious disease that we can spread from person to person. Your own personal behavior can have a great effect on our community well-being.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when they see that sole mathematical look, they have trouble connecting to it.
Yeah, you're right. And that's really my failing is I think about stuff all in terms of math and probability fields. Like, for example, if you're going to drive a car, you are definitely harming everybody else in the world from pollution. And then you're definitely harming everybody in your town from the chance of like either scaring them or making noise that disturbs them or crashing into them, you know, but it's not very likely. So we choose to make that driving decision periodically when our own needs are worth basically being an asshole to everybody else. A small amount of asshole, right? Because it's a small probability. And that's how it is with viruses too. Like, so then you move on to the flu. Every time you, like for every season, you always may be carrying an infectious disease, like most likely a flu type virus. And you can always spread that to people. So you have to decide when to wear a mask or when to stay at home. And then COVID has now raised the stakes on that. Like it's a more dangerous disease by the flu, but it's about 3 to 5 times more dangerous. So if you go out, like if you would normally have a party with, let's say 30 people, and then you scale that down to 10 people, then you've actually like mathed out the risk to be roughly as cruel as you were being by having a party with this large, you know, like it's probability. So it's not a yes and no thing. It's not like you're an asshole if you stand on your deck without a mask and you're a saint if you stand on your deck with a mask. It's like a big spectrum, you know, and at the very worst would be, let's hold a massive political rally in a small stadium where everybody is not wearing masks and they're yelling, right? Like a Trump rally, like they just did. That would be a much bigger spreading event than you choosing to have your best friends over for a backyard barbecue. But people were treating these things as if they're all the same, which they're not. So I don't know.
I think one of the main reasons it's become emotional, because like you're saying, there's tons of shades of gray.
Yeah.
But one easy way to differentiate is people can do the kind of yes or no, 1 or 0 based on whether you wear a mask.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to stereotype a large population, it's very easy to say people who don't wear masks are in the wrong and people who do wear masks are in the right. And because it's such a simple variable, I think it's really become a hot discussion point. And I think tempers do rise because it's very easy to see a picture of someone walking in the middle of the street without a mask on, surrounded by masked people, and think that person is the person in the wrong.
Yeah, but that's an outdoor setting too. Like that's outdoor transmission is way less of a big deal than indoor. So, and this is the kind of stuff that I try to encourage my readers to think about, is like, think about the numbers instead of thinking in black and white. So if I'm a school teacher and I insist on not wearing a mask and all my students want to be not exposed to the virus, you know, when I'm in a classroom, that is a big imposition. Whereas if I'm a solo bicyclist on a empty bike path and I choose not to wear a mask, that's completely different. And I want people to think about everything as, you know, as shades of gray and not be judgmental. And even if somebody is being inconsiderate, chances are it's not a huge deal of inconsiderate. Like we are a selfish creature in general, human beings. So you just got to accept that, and you can choose your friends who are more considerate, right? Without actually making newspaper stories about people who you think are inconsiderate.
There was another line of criticism that's definitely adjacent to this that looks from a different angle. And it's this idea of ableism. I saw this brought up, or even privilege. So, this idea of ableism is that it's easy for a healthy middle aged male to say, bike, eat healthy, take care of yourself, lift barbells, but that's really not possible for everybody. There's tons of people who are disabled from the, you know, physically able standpoint, and then there are tons of people who financially can't afford bikes or can't afford barbells or
Well,
live
that
in
part
a
is silly because bikes are
yeah.
cheaper than cars, and most people drive cars. So,
But there is the argument that there are financial circumstances which make some of that more difficult, or
yeah.
even eating healthy, right? If you grew up in a poor neighborhood that's a food desert and there's not a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables available, these are things that, you know, we have some privileges in life. What do you think about that criticism? I mean, is it a valid criticism to say that maybe that text or that tweet was a little bit insensitive because it didn't take into consideration people who didn't have the abilities that you or I have on a
Mm-hmm.
regular daily basis?
Yeah. So, in a way, yes, it's insensitive. But it's kind of a choice because you only have people's attention for a short amount of time, right? So just like in my earlier little speech about statistics, I'm writing out to a statistical sample. Like I'm not writing to you in particular, I'm writing to who I think is going to read the tweet or the blog post. And most people are able-bodied enough to have choices about transportation, and most of my audience is, to be honest, like fairly high income, well employed. It's like tech workers. A lot of tech workers read the blog, a lot of teachers, doctors, attorneys and stuff, and then also lots of other types of people. So with this limited amount of people's attention I have, like I'm just trying to send out a message that will create the most behavior change that I can, and focus on one thing. So my thing is reduce the natural resource consumption of the world in the fastest way I can. And to me, I think that's rich people. So I target the economic behaviors of wealthy people, and I choose to, like, there's other stuff, you know, there's like racial unfairness and there's like income inequality, which is sort of the stuff you mentioned. Those are separate problems, and I acknowledge that they're real, but they're not my area of specialty. So I don't want to dilute my main message, which is, hey, rich people, spend less, with like, okay, but also if you're mobility impaired, you should do this. And then if you can't afford a bike, you could do this other thing. Like those are valuable messages too. But like, A, those are things I'm not very skilled in understanding. And B, I think my time would be less well used addressing the niche cases because the big piece of pie is so big already. And I'm just one guy. So I'm trying to do like a big project with very limited resources. So I'm just trying to focus on it.
In other words, you are speaking to your avatar. So for you, your crowd, the people who you generally interact with your blog, who are consuming your content, this tweet made a lot of sense for them.
Well, I mean, maybe not that tweet, hopefully, but in general, like the stuff that I write, like 500 blog articles and all these tweets and stuff, that's the general purpose. So like, I'm trying to be pragmatic. And in a way that can, if you're thinking of me as like talking to you personally, and you're not the person I actually wrote it for, the type of person, then it'll seem insensitive. And of course, that'll make you think, you know, if you don't understand how the internet works or what I'm trying to do, it'll seem like I'm an asshole, right? Like, how dare he talk to me when I'm in a wheelchair and he's talking about biking? Like, he's an asshole. But it's not that at all. Like, I am not trying to ability shame or any other type of shame people. I'm just trying to create change in a large demographic of people that happen to be interested in my message. So for me, tech workers, and people who think somewhat analytically and people who have reasonably high incomes, they find the strategies, like some of the stuff they find it useful, so they follow it. And then to me, that's really great because I get a lot more people moving close to work and driving less and biking more, and our cities are getting to be friendlier places. And another thing that's important to me, like fatherhood, I get so many emails from young men who have just had children, and they're like, I'm going to devote most of my time to raising kids because I've set aside my super high powered career, and now I'm an equal parent, or like I'm doing even more than half of the parenting. And that is why I do this stuff. Like, we're creating change among the few, certain population that happens to be willing to listen to me. So I can only do so much.
There was one last criticism I thought was interesting, and I'm wondering your thoughts about it. There was a thread that said something to the extent of, well, Pete believes in the low information diet, so he's not really aware of what's going on in our world right now. So it's no surprise that he would tweet something like this.
That's normally true. And I certainly like the low information diet. But when it comes to COVID and this particular, pandemic and world health situation, it's like the opposite. I've read too much, and I'm torn on whether I wish I had done that or not. But I guess it was because it was something that came up that I didn't understand, and I needed to understand it. So I dug into data, and when it comes down to it, like, I think that the disease is it's like a lot less dangerous, like infection fatality rate wise, than most people think. If you just took a poll of people, what are your chances of being hospitalized or dying, and like what's the average age of death? But even more important is, I think it's a disease that the only way to beat it is either a herd immunity or a vaccine. And there's a lot of signs of herd immunity already forming in places like New York and Italy and Spain, and at a lower infection rate than we thought, with less death rate than we thought. So I think the responsible path, this is going to sound crazy for people who haven't dug into this stuff, but I think the younger and healthier people and kids should basically be exposed to low doses of it, build up the immunity while we super protect the people that need it. And then those people become the herd, and they become a blocking force a lot more quickly than we get a vaccine. And I think that would lead to less deaths in older people. And I also think it would lead to less disruption in terms of like wrecking our society too much from being afraid of everything. Because if we're all going to wait inside our apartments until there's a vaccine, and that vaccine is widely distributed, not just in our country, but in the whole world, because we also want to reopen our borders, that's a really, really long time. Like, even with the vaccines coming so fast right now, it's still, I think, a really poor strategic choice. So yeah, my ideology is, I think every time there's a coronavirus case and someone recovers, that's good news, because that's another vaccinated person. And the news stories are like reporting every coronavirus case as if it's a bad thing. I think the only thing that's bad is when people are really sick and they suffer or end up in the hospital. And of course, when they die, those are the only thing that's bad. Every recovery that's not painful for the person is like great news for society.
So I don't want this to turn into a big COVID argument. I actually do not agree with that at all, for a number of reasons. And it could take a whole podcast in itself to go through that. There's a lot of studies suggesting, for instance, that we might not ever reach herd immunity, or that immunity might be short-lived. And there's also a lot of evidence that we may be able to get to herd immunity in better ways with less death if we're smarter about it. So
like masks definitely lower the threshold to reach herd immunity.
And death rates, unfortunately, could very well start rising quite a bit over the next few weeks, because we know that there's a huge lag time between cases, hospitalization, and then deaths. But it's not known as part of the problem.
Because most of our country has not gone through the infection. So the theory for the herd immunity crowd is that only when you reach a level of like New York City's type of like exposure, then you would end up with, if you're lucky, herd immunity effects. But most of the US is only like 1/5 of the way there or something, right?
Yeah.
So until that happens, you have to have deaths, and and the peak the debate is like, how many of the people have to die? And it's going to be like the oldest people mostly, before you reach that. And then is that an acceptable level or not? And so those are the things like I read a lot of things that say what you just said, and then I've read the other side of it, and try to make a decision on which seems more credible. But if people are going to argue about this stuff, it's really, you don't have to be mad at the person. You can just say like, have you seen this? Here's a paper I want you to read. And if you value that person's opinion, then you say, please report back to me with what you think about this paper. And then, I would write back to you and I'd be like, yeah, what do you think? And you'd say, well, I disagree for these reasons because of the following numbers. And then that way, nobody has to be an asshole. Nobody is insensitive. We're just talking about numbers and facts. And like, do you think this is a good trade-off for society or not?
That's a perfect segue into talking about some of these bigger picture issues about what happens when we disagree as a community, and certainly on social media. I've heard lots of opinions on your tweet. And if I was to roughly and very generically break them into two groups, one group is unhappy and feels that it was insensitive and is unhappy you put it out there. The other group may or may not agree with you, but what they're really worried about is this idea that people will use that tweet to either try to cancel you or censor you, or that in general in our community, we're taking these little bits of information from the internet and using it to cancel people out and censor them. Do you worry about these things when you put something out there? Like, does it feel like our community has changed and it's a little bit more aggressive and threatening for us to put out our opinions?
Well, I've seen that a little bit, especially on Twitter, it happens. And I really disagree with that behavior, I think, but I can't really try to control it. Like if somebody wants to be, like a Twitter police and like, oh, you've said something that's not in line with the proper way of saying things, I'm going to unfollow you, then that's fine. Like, I don't feel I don't want that type of person following me anyway, but I do want to remain like, I want people to think my advice is useful because I'm trying to make a difference with it. So if I'm offending people so much that they are not going to listen to what I'm trying to get across, I'm going to try to express things differently. But when it comes to real disagreements like that I'm going to participate in, I've learned, over the last 10 years of getting older, the only real way to disagree with somebody is by asking a question. So, and it has to be a really honest, non-judgmental, non-angry question, and you have to be wanting to hear the answer. So, if I respect your opinion and you put something that I don't understand, I think is wrong on Twitter or your blog, and if I want to change your mind or at least learn why you think that, I'll say, hey, Doc G, have you seen this other paper by Michael Levitt, and it really seems to disagree with what you said about herd immunity or whatever. How do you explain, or what's your opinion on the difference between these two things? And that way you have a chance to respond, and I'm not compromising our friendship by insulting you. I'm just saying, I've seen this and it's different from what you're saying. So how do you resolve the difference? Because if we're friends, and if anything that's worth talking about with another person, you want to hear their opinion. And if you don't want to hear their opinion, then tune out and don't bother listening in the first place. But, there's no need to ever throw insults at somebody. And I'm really, really strict about that. And I always have, like in my blog, in the comment section, like if somebody responds angrily to somebody else, the comment just gets deleted, because that's not how you do social discourse in my forum. It has to be you're answering a question, asking a question, and you're trying to agree or disagree on data. There's no interpersonal I'm mad at you stuff, because the world is already a mean enough place, without us getting mad at each other.
In my intro, I mentioned that blog post, the shockingly simple math behind early retirement. That was 2012. So you've been in this personal finance, financial independence, retire early community for a long time. In fact, I would say that it's mostly grown up right there with you and around you. Do you think things are changing in our community? Are we less open to listening to each other's opinions?
I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention to that aspect before or now. And, if you tune into news type stuff or arguments, that's what you're going to see. You're focusing on arguments. In my real life, I certainly see a harmonious and cooperative world, and more people keep coming into it through our co-working space. So I see a great, wonderful cooperative spot. And for example, the co-working space has its own Slack group, which is just a discussion board for people who don't use the Slack tool. And we have a channel that's called Corona Chat, and we post stuff back and forth and comment it. Like somebody will share a news article, and then another person will comment on it, and then we'll disagree with each other. But there's been zero anger in that whole thing. We started in March, back when coronavirus started being a news story, and there's quite a few people participating, and it's all been agreeable. So I think it's a good way to run your own life, and it's certainly a good way for public discourse to happen. And I would like to see more encouragement of that, but it's really not my specialty. Like, how do we fix it? Like, is there a way to make Twitter more civil, or the comments on like CNN.com news stories or Fox News? That is something that is out of my lane, to use your earlier thing. I'm not very good at, I don't really know much about big crowd social dynamics and tribes and fighting and stuff. So to me, it's a mystery. Maybe I can learn more about that if someone recommends a few books to learn about how to handle these things. For me, I just kind of run away from it. Like, I don't like conflict, and I don't create conflict. And I could probably be a little tougher at dealing with conflictive people. I tend to just shut them out of my life. But I'm certainly trying not to create it online.
One of the problems with Twitter, certainly, and even some of the other platforms, is it's really hard to have an open, clear conversation in such small bites without hearing someone's voice or without seeing someone's face. So there are going to be many people listening to this who read your tweet. Some of them will be those people who really found fault with it. This is a better chance for you to talk to them directly. What would you say to them about this tweet? Is there anything that you think you couldn't convey there? And of course, that's what this whole conversation has been about. But
Yeah.
any last words you would say to them and say, look, this is kind of what I meant, which maybe couldn't be conveyed in that tweet?
Yeah, I think we certainly have covered it really well with the, all this deep explanation and stuff. But the final word be, I still love you. Like, I'm only writing these things because I'm your bossy older brother. I'm trying to help, and I'm trying to use my weird perspective of the world. And I know it can be hard to deal with because, like, I'm a numbers person. I'm a little bit of a robot. But that's the same reason why money worked for me, and that's the same reason I explained money. I tried to explain my different perspective in money and how it can get you to early retirement. It's just because I see things differently, and I see things in terms of the numbers, and then I'm trying to take this side and then explain it to the real world in like actionable advice. So my tweet is just saying public health and personal health are really the same thing, and like 75% of our medical spending or something like that is on these diseases that are influenced by our lifestyle. And that should be like, if the New York Times is trying to help people, they should be finding ways to make it so we are all, like, a much larger percentage of us are healthy. And so that there is no obesity epidemic and there is no diabetic, like, everybody who reads the New York Times should understand that drinking, for example, a can of soda is like smoking a crack pipe. Like, it's super, super bad for you. Not exactly the same degree, but it's like unacceptable. And like making cookies and giving dessert to your family is killing them. Like, sugar is the devil. Like, this is just one of many public health messages I would love to have more popular. So New York Times has managed to like get this brand new concept that wearing a mask is caring. Wearing is caring. So good, but that's only like a temporary help for right now. If they could get these messages that are much bigger effect, and like cars wreck cities, that would change public health so much, and it would save trillions and trillions of dollars in what we spend our money on in this country. But they're not pushing that message. So I think we should push these messages that do make bigger changes. And that's all I was trying to do with that tweet, is like, let's get healthy, because that basically fixes a lot of life problems, including today's problem.
Well, Pete, I wanted to thank you for coming on today and discussing something that's difficult, which is disagreement. And no one loves conflict, or at least a lot of us don't. And dealing with it and trying to make yourself understood while still delivering a message can be difficult. So thank you for coming on and talking with us today. Before we say goodbye, are there any projects you want to tell us about? Anything in your future interesting happening?
Oh, it's just the usual stuff. I'm keeping things light and being a dad mostly around here, which is why I've not been writing on the blog much. So yeah, just I hope I can be back into doing more writing in the future, and hopefully I can recover from the great pain of this Twitter blunder and get back on my feet.
This has been the Earn and Invest podcast. On behalf of myself, Doc G, I wanted to thank Pete Adeney. That's a wrap.
All right, cool.
3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
Hey, this is Pete Adeney, also known as Mr. Money Mustache, and you're listening to the Earn and Invest podcast.